All right, so we are here at the Space Access Conference in Phoenix, Arizona with Ed DeReyes. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the opportunity.
So you have a company, Spaceworthy Incorporated. Tell me, what is it that you do?
I'm the managing director of a group of consultants. The amount varies from time to time. We have a core of consultants, anywhere from DERs to DARs, which are designated airworthiness representatives for the FAA or designated engineering representatives. Also engineers who have experience in aircraft certification and design. And we've been in business for a number of years. Actually, the founding company was a company called Water West, but over the last few years, and been in business since 1994, and over the last few years we started getting more and more requests to answer questions specifically about AST 400. As more people have sought to transition to space and to launch and put payloads and people into space, there have been a lot more questions. And so typically there's kind of a hesitance to actually approach the FAA directly. So they'll ask somebody that knows. In the past, they knew we had quite a bit of experience with certification and everything else with the FAA, so we naturally started fielding more and more questions. And as time has gone on, we've actually transitioned to that, as we worked more projects and worked side by side with industry. We've been able to move more into that. We've got a field of practice that it's only been within the last year that we've opened up a field of practice that was more slanted towards AST 400. We still continue to do FAA certification, both Part 25, Part 23. We've also started doing quite a bit of consultancy on UAS. Several people within our company are unmanned aircraft systems or aerial systems subject matter experts.
So now that the FAA has become more of an authority on getting the licensing for space vehicles, how is it that you can help some of these commercial companies or even just amateur rocket launchers to get the appropriate licensing?
Many ways. One is we do know how to deal with the FAA. That's actually, it's more of an advantage than anything else. I always tell people, it's like if you started a company and wanted to go into space, or even if you built an airplane and wanted to fly it, and if you didn't bring somebody on board that was not familiar with the process, it makes the process that much more difficult. Any company, our company, that doesn't matter. Every company is bounded by two things: money and schedule, and usually they're very interchangeable. And that's exactly what we're seeing is the companies that don't hire somebody who has that familiarity with the FAA, has familiarity with AST 400 or with any other type of FAA certification, they end up spending a lot more money and they end up taking quite a bit more time to get their project through what we call the halls of the FAA. So it makes sense. One thing I always tell people is it's like wanting to go fishing to the best fishing spot on the Amazon River, but not wanting to hire a guide to get there. Just loading up your pack and your fishing pole and just heading out. A lot of pitfalls, a lot of quicksand, a lot of places where you can get really, really lost very quickly. We're the guides. That's what we do. We know the best fishing spots. We take you right to that spot. Wherever you need to go, that's where we take you. And it really helps. There's a philosophy in a lot of organizations that AST 400 is so new that nobody really knows what they're doing. It just makes more sense to just throw somebody who's never done FAA certification before, just throw them in there, and because everybody's learning, they'll be fine. And we get a lot of our customers from people who've done that, and they want to know some historical background on why the FAA requires a certain thing the way they do, or what drove this, or does my design have to meet this if I'm doing this? Those types of questions. So,
well, maybe you can enlighten us a little bit. What is an AST 400?
AST 400 is basically the section of, I'm hesitant to call it regulation, but it is. It's a regulation that covers commercial space operations for the FAA. put into place several years ago. And basically what it says is this is how we're going to license and permit companies, people who want to commercially operate launch companies that are going to be launching spacecraft or vehicles into space. In literally anything, space they're basically defining as launching and recovering, similar to a rocket. Doesn't have to be a rocket, but it can be launching and recovering, and it could be anything from about 60,000 feet on.
So if, for example, for a multi-stage rocket, would that certification only be able to qualify for the first and possibly second stages? Anything that is in space is no longer under that certification? How does that work?
It isn't retroactive, no. In other words, anything that's already in space does not have to meet that. However, there wasn't, other than for defense, I should say for defense and for NASA, there were rockets that were put up prior to AST 400. But over the last few years, really, truthfully, since the rise of the Spaceship One and those historic flights and the X Prize, that's really where it more came into focus. That's when we really started receiving a lot of inquiries regarding AST 400, and it's really taken off from there. So that was the AST 400. Even the thought of AST 400 has been around for quite a bit of time. It wasn't until the last few years, and as I mentioned previously, wasn't until the launch or the successful second flight or third flight, really, of Spaceship One that it really has come much more into prominence. And it's similar, AST 400, for lack of a better example, but if you build an airplane and you want to sell it to the public, you go to the FAA and you would get it licensed. If it's under 12,000 pounds, for example, you get it licensed under the 14 CFR, it's 14 Code of Federal Regulations, FAA Part 23, and that covers what they consider light airplanes. So it could be a twin-engine airplane, larger one. But anyway, that's an example. AST 400 is basically the same thing, but for spacecraft or space vehicles, commercial space vehicles, and it doesn't have the regulations that Part 23 does, or 25, because it's so new. They're looking to industry to provide a lot of that input. We're going to do this way. And it's actually a fresh start in many ways, because while Part 23, Part 25, other regulations within the FAA are very codified. You can look in that and say, if I meet that, they're going to give me a license. It's not that way with AST 400. Excuse me, I say license. They're going to give me an airworthiness certification if I meet, if I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 under Part 23, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 under Part 25. I'm pretty assured that I'm going to get a certificate at the end, an airworthiness or a type certificate for that airplane.